Stephen A. Smith Show. Before I get on out of here, I had to talk about a story that's very, very important. And albeit indirectly, it involves...
It is being called the single greatest act of self-sabotage in the history of modern sport. A decision so bafflingly arrogant that it turned the entire sports media landscape upside down. This wasn't just a roster cut. This was a multi-million-dollar business decision driven by ego, resentment, and a desperate need to protect the status quo. When Stephen A. Smith went on national television and effectively confirmed that USA Basketball refused to promote Caitlin Clark, he wasn't delivering a hot take. He was exposing a deeper rot inside the infrastructure of women's basketball, a culture of gatekeeping that prioritized the comfort of veterans over the explosion of the sport. The narrative they tried to sell was about fairness and experience, a story about a rookie needing to wait her turn. But the reality, as laid out by the most powerful voice in sports media, was far darker. It was a story about a clique of established stars and administrators who looked at the biggest golden goose to ever step onto a basketball court and shut the door in her face because she skipped the line. This is how USA Basketball fumbled the bag, why they did it, and why the backlash will follow them for decades. To understand the magnitude of the mistake, you have to look at the state of the WNBA before Caitlin Clark arrived. For 28 years, the league fought for survival. Despite elite talent, it struggled to capture mainstream attention. Reports consistently indicated financial losses, heavily subsidized by the NBA. Players flew commercial. They played in second-tier arenas. They chased media coverage that rarely came. Then, like a lightning strike, Caitlin Clark arrived. She wasn't just a great college player. She was a cultural phenomenon. Pulling up from the logo, commanding millions of viewers, selling out arenas that had been empty for years. When she declared for the draft, ticket prices for the Indiana Fever skyrocketed by thousands of % before she even signed a contract. The message was obvious. She was the savior the league had been waiting for. Any rational business would have recognized the opportunity. The Olympics in Paris were approaching, a global stage with the world watching. The formula was simple: put Caitlin Clark on that plane. It didn't matter if she played 5 minutes per game. She brings cameras. She brings sponsors. She bridges the gap between a niche audience and a global one. Instead, USA Basketball threw the winning lottery ticket away. When the roster dropped and Clark's name was missing, the sports world froze. It defied logic. And that's when Stephen A. Smith stepped in to explain what was really happening behind closed doors. He didn't just criticize the move. He dissected the arrogance behind it. He argued that decision-makers were operating inside a bubble, detached from the realities of modern sports business. They hid behind basketball criteria, defense, size, experience, while ignoring business reality. In no industry do you hide your best-selling product because senior employees think it's unfair. Smith drew a brutal comparison to the Dream Team. When Team USA went to Barcelona in 1992, they didn't leave icons home for technical reasons. They brought Magic Johnson. They brought Larry Bird. They brought them because they were legends. They brought them to sell the game. USA Basketball had the chance to create the women's version of that moment, a generational Olympic squad that transcended the sport. Instead, they assembled a technically elite roster that felt culturally invisible to the casual fan. The most uncomfortable part of Smith's argument was the word nobody wants to say out loud: jealousy. There has been a Mean Girls energy surrounding Clark's rise. Veterans who spent 10 to 15 years grinding in relative obscurity watched a 22-year-old walk in and land a $28 million deal with Nike. They watched her receive private security. They watched charter flights materialize, benefits they had demanded for years, suddenly become reality once she arrived. Resentment is human. Leadership is supposed to rise above it. Instead, the Olympic selection process appeared to lean into it. Smith suggested the roster wasn't just about winning gold, Because let's be honest, Team USA could likely win with its B team. It was about maintaining hierarchy. Leaving Clark off sent a message. This league values seniority over popularity. But that framing collapses under scrutiny. Professional sports is entertainment. It's star-driven. By refusing to elevate Clark, they weren't protecting integrity. They were protecting ego. They were guarding the spotlight for those who had paid their dues. And as Smith shouted on First Take, nobody cares about your dues if they aren't watching the game. Now consider the fairness defense. The shield USA Basketball has leaned on for months. They argued that veterans like Diana Taurasi, Brittany Griner, and Breanna Stewart had committed years to the national team program. They attended camp. They played qualifiers. Cutting one of them for a rookie who hadn't been embedded in the system would be unfair. That's the argument. But fairness doesn't drive billion-dollar sports industries. Visibility does. Growth does. Momentum does. And in a moment when women's basketball had never been hotter, USA Basketball chose tradition over transformation. On the surface, that argument sounds reasonable. But once you dig deeper, it collapses. The Olympics are not a participation trophy for perfect attendance. They are a global showcase. You take the 12 players who give you the best chance to win and the best chance to grow the sport. Is it fair that Caitlin Clark drives 400% higher ratings than anyone else? Maybe not. But it is reality. Stephen A. Smith drove that point home. Life is not fair. Business is definitely not fair. The NBA was not fair to veterans in the 1980s when they pushed Magic Johnson and Larry Bird to the front. They did it because they were struggling. The WNBA has been on financial life support for decades. And when they finally found a cure, they rejected it because it did not look like the medicine they were used to. The backlash was immediate and intense. What made it worse was the tone of the response. Instead of acknowledging fan frustration, parts of the women's basketball community doubled down. Fans were labeled newbies. They were told they did not understand the game. That kind of gatekeeping is exactly what Smith warned about. You cannot invite people into the arena and then get upset when they want the music they came to hear. The old guard seemed almost satisfied that Clark was left off. It felt like a hazing ritual. Welcome to the league. Sit at home while we go to Paris. But without Clark, the buzz evaporated. Yes, Team USA won gold. They are a dynasty. But did it shift culture? Did it create a wave of new fans? No. It became another tournament played while the larger conversation centered on why the most famous player in the sport was absent. And this issue goes beyond the Olympic roster. It carried into how her entire rookie season was handled. Smith pointed to the silence from league leadership when Clark absorbed heavy contact night after night. The hip check from Chindy Carter was not a basketball play. It was a message. Physicality is part of the sport, but the surrounding commentary turned toxic. Some voices openly suggested she needed to be knocked around to learn her place. If this were the NBA and a rookie version of Michael Jordan was being targeted, the response would have been swift. Instead, there was hesitation, a reluctance to upset veterans. That hesitation reinforced Smith's broader claim. Internal politics are paralyzing leadership. Protecting the hierarchy became more important than protecting the star who was driving unprecedented attention. The racial dimension adds another layer of complexity. Smith addressed it directly because it cannot be ignored. The league has been powered by black women for decades without receiving equal compensation or recognition. Then a white player from Iowa arrives and immediately lands a massive deal with Nike, national commercials, and mainstream fame. It is not hard to understand where resentment can form. But acknowledging emotion is different from endorsing the business decision. Smith's argument was simple. You do not correct historical inequities by undermining the future. Growth benefits everyone. If Clark expands revenue, salaries rise. Travel improves. Exposure multiplies. Turning the moment into a cultural standoff instead of a business breakthrough fractured the narrative. Paris could have showcased unity and star power. Instead, the divide deepened. Now look at the basketball justification. The committee cited physicality, defense, turnovers. Smith countered with the numbers. Yes, she turned the ball over. She also handled the ball nearly every possession for a rebuilding team and led the league in assists. She generated offense at a rate few others could match. And the defensive argument? Team USA has historically dominated international competition. They win by wide margins. The gap with the world is shrinking, but it is not closed. They could have sheltered her defensively for limited minutes. The basketball reasons felt like a smoke screen, technical explanations masking a personal grievance. They wanted to prove they could win without her. They did. But the cost may have been larger than the medal. Consider the media economic. NBC pays billions for Olympic broadcasting rights. Networks crave stars, narratives, ratings. Reports indicated executives were far from pleased. They had the opportunity to market the most talked-about player in American sports, and instead were handed a roster the casual viewer might struggle to recognize. This is not a slight against Aya Wilson or Breanna Stewart. They are elite. But cultural icon status is different from basketball excellence. Fame is not purely about skill. It is about capturing the moment. Clark has that quality. Others, at least for now, do not command it at the same scale. By sidelining the one player who embodied that momentum, USA Basketball effectively told NBC that ratings were secondary. In a world driven by billion-dollar media rights deals, that is a risky stance. And then there is the Nike angle. Caitlin Clark signed a massive deal with Nike, reportedly worth $28 million over 8 years. Nike is also a major sponsor of USA Basketball. In the often transactional world of sports, shoe companies usually get what they want. If Nike wants its signature athlete on the Olympic stage, that request typically carries weight. The fact that even Nike could not push Clark onto the roster shows how deep the resistance ran. It suggests the resentment within the selection process, and among parts of the veteran core, was strong enough to override even the sport's most powerful corporate partner. Stephen A. Smith found that especially revealing. It meant the gatekeepers were willing to defy their biggest financial ally just to prove a point. That level of stubbornness does not signal confidence. It signals something personal. Then there is the Sheryl Swoopes factor. While she was not on the selection committee, she represents the voice of the legends. Her public comments during the season, incorrectly claiming Clark played 5 years in college to chase records and downplaying her impact, reflected the environment Clark stepped into. Smith repeatedly highlighted this tone. When the icons of a league attempt to minimize the accomplishments of its newest star, it exposes a cultural fracture. The Olympic omission felt like the institutional version of those comments. A message from the establishment, you are not that special. But the numbers told a different story. Ticket sales surged. Television ratings spiked. Records fell whenever Clark played. When she did not, interest cooled. Refusing to promote her was, in many ways, a refusal to accept what the data made obvious. The aftermath only intensified the narrative. After the Olympics, Clark returned rested and arguably sharper than ever. She broke rookie assist records. She shattered scoring marks. She pushed the Indiana Fever into playoff contention. Doubts faded. And from USA Basketball? Silence. No acknowledgement. No recalibration. Just distance. Smith argues that silence is telling. It suggests an unwillingness to admit miscalculation. As Clark continued proving she belonged among the elite, the earlier basketball-based justifications felt thinner. Rather than revisit the decision, leadership appeared content to wait for the news cycle to move on. But stories like this do not fade because they tap into something larger than sports. They mirror workplace politics. The talented newcomer threatens the established order. The insecure hierarchy closes rank. It resonates because it feels familiar. Smith's outrage channels that shared experience, the frustration of watching merit sidelined by bureaucracy. There is also the global lens. The Olympics in Paris offered an international stage. European audiences appreciate quality basketball, but they also gravitate towards stars. Think back to the Dream Team in 1992. Crowds gathered just to glimpse the bus. The spectacle transcended competition. Without Clark, Team USA remained dominant but less magnetic. With her, the scene in Paris could have been electric, front-page attention across London, Berlin, Tokyo. Instead of transforming the league into a global brand, USA Basketball kept the momentum largely domestic. They chose control over expansion. Smith labeled it marketing malpractice for a reason. Opportunities like that do not come often. A generational talent, an Olympic year, a global spotlight. The conditions aligned and the curtain stayed closed. Vindication, at least in part, arrived in the post-Olympic ratings. Clark's games continued drawing massive numbers. Other matchups did not experience the same surge. The so-called Clark effect proved specific and measurable. It was not just about the league riding a general wave. It was about one player driving unprecedented attention.